But health insurance requires a very specialised level of knowledge to be able to understand what those services are that somebody requires and how appropriate or otherwise they are. So Mednet has expertise in understanding the funding and the services that are required in the provision of healthcare. And it also exists in the private sector. So the business that we deal with is those in the private sector who hold insurance policies. I think this statement tells quite an interesting story. I think the symposium and the presentations that have been had have been wonderful and really enlightening and in many ways very inspiring. But when we look at a simple statistic here, it is currently estimated that 3.73% of the population has a functional disability that limits their independence. That basically means nearly 1 in 20 people. That's a large number of people in a country the size of Saudi Arabia. But as an insurer, and also as somebody who comes from another part of the world, I think that perhaps that number only tells a very small part of the story. You'll see here, before I talk about the international comparison, that when we look at disability in the kingdom, around about a third, about 35% of the people who are known to have disability have this congenital disability. But an increasingly large proportion of people in the kingdom and worldwide have an acquired disability. Traumatic disability is, in this graph here, 9.7% or 10% of disability is acquired. That's motor car accidents or other injuries, spinal injuries, etc. So disability does not just affect those who are born with a condition. Disability can most certainly be acquired. And disability also, as we will see, does not just affect the young or our children. The aged can also suffer a disability. As you may have guessed from my non-Arabic accent, I am an Australian. And when I compare the information that I used to look at in Australia, where I was actually doing a similar job to what I do here, when I look at the Australian experience, we have a case where in Australia, nearly 1 in 5 or 20% of the population have some form of classifiable disability. That could be mild, moderate, severe, or profound. And lest you should think that Australia is a broken country, the statistic is almost exactly the same in the USA and the United Kingdom. So when I mentioned the 3.7% representation of disability in the Saudi population, I think it is reasonable to assume that maybe that number is understating the number of people who actually are affected and whose lives are in some way compromised. And this comes back to a theme which I'll mention a couple of times and which I think this whole symposium is about, which is about awareness. Just talking about disability is an enormous step in actually meeting the needs of these people. To put a little bit of context into that 1 in 5 people in the Australian population, there's a lot of similarities between Australia and Saudi Arabia. The population is similar, the land mass is similar, we have a lot of sand, it's very hot. Actually, I'm proud to say that we believe we have more camels than Saudi Arabia. But when I look at the distribution of disability, nearly 10% of the Australian population have a disability that would be rated as moderate to profound. And again, that statistic is repeated in the United States and in the United Kingdom. Saudi Arabia is very lucky that it has a very young population, but the population will age and is aging and will face the same health issues as anywhere else in the world. So again, I say, the 1 in 20 or less than 4% figure